Okay, welcome to the mini lesson on historical questioning. History is like a kaleidoscope. Here is a kaleidoscope. So what do I mean by this? Well, in your first lesson you read about different approaches to doing history, and we called this the history of history, or historiography. And you saw that there's been many different perspectives on how to do history and what the appropriate subject matter for history was. We also learned that writing history involves writing about the complexities, and these are complexities that can't be captured like an instant replay. You can't just rewind the present into the past and watch it like a television show or a sports replay. You can't do this with real life. And we also saw that history doesn't repeat itself. So the stuff of history, the main subject matter of history, human experience, and this is the main subject matter for the humanities, it's where the knowledge in humanities comes from. But the stuff of history, human experience, is always moving and changing. And the same patterns never occur twice. So this is why history is in some sense like a kaleidoscope. So a kaleidoscope's kind of a useful metaphor to use here. So I'll get rid of this kaleidoscope. It's quite nice to look at. And we'll go back to the slides. I just covered this. If you want to look at that kaleidoscope, you can look at the link there. So, today's mini lesson is on historical questioning. And this is within the idea of how to think about history. Knowing history is only possible through the stories that are told about it. Stories that are told by many people and supported by many different kinds of evidence. And the stories are told in different ways by different people at different times and in different places. So historical thinking about the past, and historical questioning involves listening to a multitude of voices available in many types of sources and trying to sort them out and then come to a story that you think is most plausible, most likely to represent the past. Present and past are different. Times are changing, the new is replacing the old, and we want to write down our stories before they are lost. There's an urge that we have as humans to record the present, which then becomes the past for future generations. And there are lots of these stories. But which ones should we listen to? We want to know what really happened. And this is the fundamental question in history. How do we arrive at a picture of the past that really does represent what actually happened? So that's what this lesson is about. It's about asking questions, giving you practical advice, and getting you started doing history by asking historical questions. So today we're looking at historical questions. And maybe we can make a bit more sense of that kaleidoscope. So historical questioning. When you think about the past, as you study and read about it, keep in mind these questions. These are questions historians have asked for a long time. Who the people were, what exactly happened, when it happened, where, why. So these are all the common questions. Who, what, when, where, why. Now, when you do try and answer these questions about the past, you'll find that the questions overlap. Sometimes a who question becomes a what question. Because when you write about someone, you also have to discuss what they did. So when you find out who someone is, you end up talking about what they did as well. And that's a what, perhaps even a why or a where question too. So, who questions? We'll go through each of these in turn. Lots of historical questions focus on individuals. If you want to focus on an individual, you can start with who questions as well. So, examples of who questions. Who was Charles I? Who supported him? Who was opposed to him? Who influenced him? Who ordered his execution? Charles I, of course, the English king who was killed during the Civil War in the 17th century in England. So, as you read about a topic, you can write down these kinds of questions. You can write down all of the questions that you think about. jot down answers for these questions as well. And you can do this while you're reading. And other questions will probably occur to you as you do this. So it's a very much an interactive approach when you're reading sources. You're writing and reading at the same time, thinking at the same time. What happened after he was killed? How successful was the new republic in England? Why did the monarchy come back? Who was the new monarch? Why did all this change? These are examples of other questions of which you would probably start asking after who questions. So let's have a look at what questions. What questions have their basis in the fundamental problem of historical understanding? What happened? What really happened? So I guess as you start to read more, as you start to research further in the topic, you'll start asking what questions, and you'll start noticing some things don't seem true. Maybe they're mythical or they're more like legends, and other things seem to represent more about what actually happened. You'll also notice problems in the language. So you'll often ask, what does this mean? Because you'll be trying to see what people in the past meant by the words that they used. And these meanings can often confuse us because they often change. So for example, I just mentioned the 17th century before in Charles I. In the 17th century, the word enthusiasm, which we use nowadays to mean to be very interested in something, to be very excited about something that's going to happen. That's roughly the everyday understanding of being enthusiastic. In the past, enthusiasm was more of a word to describe a religious feeling. So it's a different sense. So you could easily read a source and read this word enthusiasm and mistake the meaning or the intended meaning of the person who's written the source. This is the problem of understanding something in context. So, examples of what questions. What qualities helped some large states to endure, to last for long periods of time? Why did the Roman Empire last for so long, for example? What qualities seemed to doom others to fail? Why did other empires not last as long? The Greek Empire was very short-lived. Okay, so I should say answering these questions is not easy. They're uncertain. They don't have definite answers. Some historians see patterns of repetitions. Others see unique circumstances. Others see circumstances in the past that allow them to predict the future. However, in the 20th century, particularly the late 20th century, most historians would not make those sorts of claims. They see uncertainty as being closer to the truth. So, when questions. So sometimes when you're looking at a historical period, you want to know exactly when something happened, something crucial. So examples here could be, when did the Ottoman Turks conquer Constantinople? When did Christopher Columbus reach America? When did the Reformation begin? I changed the tense here for a few of them. So the trouble with when questions is they're complicated by our notion of time. Time, everyday time, right? 24 hours a day. 365 days in the year, 12 months, and so on, right? This is our standard notion of time, formal notions of time. However, in the past and in different cultures, time has been considered differently. So an example here would be in some Islamic cultures, they have a concept of time called hijra, excuse my pronunciation. And it's just a different time system. So notions of time, when you're trying to understand something historically and people are discussing time and sources, this is something which you have to be aware of. However, when questions can be very fascinating. Questions like these would include, when did European trade and colonization start transforming the Americas? When did slavery become a major trade? When did the ideas of Luther in the Reformation become influential? Now, I've mentioned the Reformation here, and again here, and this is a time period we're going to look at in this course. Where questions? Questions about where things happen can often be absorbing. For example, no one knows the exact location of the Rubicon River. That's the famous river Julius Caesar is alleged to have crossed in violation of the Roman Republic. Wherever it is now, it has a different name. So, where questions involve geography, and you could think about geography when you do history. Geographic questions can allow you to access an unimagined landscape of events and explanation. This was one of the main focuses of this historical school of thought, the Analyse school in France. Geography was their fundamental concern. They asked lots of historical questions that were focused on geography. For example, how long did it take to travel from one place to another in Europe? Where major trade routes were? Where different crops were grown? What cities had the closest relations with one another? All of this would allow you to understand how a person living at this time would consider or relate to their own landscape. So it'll tell you about the culture as well. Why questions? Sometimes you want to know what happened. But through these questions, basic curiosity, your own imagination should lead you to ask why it happened. And why did it have the influence it did? So these are questions that are basically about cause and effect. And these are eternal questions in history that fascinate everyone. But it's often difficult to see exactly how one cause relates to an effect. And often there's never a simple explanation here. So good historical questioning considers how many different but related influences work on what happens and see things in context. So when you're asking these kinds of questions, you have to work with a large context of people and events, many sources, and get a large picture of the time period if you're going to be able to develop answers for these types of questions. So often why questions become very, very complex, sometimes uncertain, but they always remain fascinating. So, excuse me, asking questions that may have been overlooked is something you should consider as well. Maybe you're reading about a topic and there certain questions just haven't really been answered yet, or they haven't been examined in particular ways, only in this previous way. So something you can look to do as we go through this course is to look at evidence that has been re-examined or examined before and try to do it in new ways. That's an excellent thing to do. Alternatively, another approach to asking historical questions is using sources that haven't been used before. Occasionally, new archives will have new materials, and this offers new possibilities for retelling a story about the past. Okay, so I'll finish now. Now, this lesson is useful for you because your first assessment asks you to develop historical questions. And your first exercise in this lesson is about practicing your first attempt to come up with historical questions. So I'll stop here.